basically what I've done is I've set the two pieces of stock, the cylinder and the hexagonal, into the fire bricks, and as you can see I've built a nice surround so that we get back heat from the flame. They're all fire bricks, so they will heat up and retain heat, and as best as I can I've made a little cocoon so that we're not losing all the heat. Now it's going to take a while for these to warm up, and we don't need to sit and watch 5 minutes of video of the two warming up, so I'll catch up to you when those are red hot and we start the drawing down phase. Okie dokie, so here we are again, and as you can see the two pieces of stock are now red hot. When you're going to draw down and forge, they want to be getting close to, not quite white hot, but it never hurt. If you can get it that hot it'd be great, but really bright red as you can get, because as soon as you put it on that anvil and start drawing it down, the anvil will suck heat out of it really quick, and as soon as it's not red it's going to get harder and harder to shape. So what we're doing down there at the moment is we're starting to draw it down to a point, flipping it over from side to side to bring that point and keep the point as even in the middle as possible, and at the same time turning it on its side to create a kind of wedge shape. Bearing in mind this is a screwdriver, so if you think of how a lot of screwdrivers are shaped, they're drawn towards a sort of almost pointed edge, and then they're also kind of wedged. Obviously I've got two to work on, so it's like one in, one out. Start the shaping process. As soon as one goes cold, pull the other one out, put the old one back in, and it's just a simple case of drawing those down until you get a shape that you're happy with. You know what a screwdriver looks like. Also, it depends on how big the screwdriver you wish to make. Obviously the stock will help dictate that. I just got to tweak that just a little bit more, and then what I'm going to do, once I've made my final tweaks and taps and I'm happy with that basic shape, I've got a pot of cold water on the side on the welding table, which I'm about to go to now, and I'm going to quench it to basically cool it down and kind of harden it. Once I've done that, there we go, we're going to disappear into the next room where I've got my grinding machines, and we will start putting the ground form on the screwdriver heads. Right, so here we are at the pedestal grinder, and what I'm going to do, now that I've got the chisels a certain degree of hardness, I'm going to start to grind the form so that they'll look how they will, or closer to the final finished look. So we're going to grind off all the scale and start shaping them to get a nicer sort of properly wedged screwdriver head shape to them. Obviously, as you can see, well, maybe you can't see, I've got a little, there it is, I've got a little coolant tank just below that pedestal grinder. So as soon as you grind a little bit, stick it into the water, cool it down, because we don't want to turn it bright red. And for those of you that are thinking, what is he doing using that disc sander for metal, I've removed the extraction thing from the bottom so that no hot sparks go into the tubes. That's just going straight down to the floor as dust. But that is aluminium oxide, so it's perfectly fine. Knife makers use those for sharpening knives, but it's just easier when you want to get a flat surface on your screwdriver to have something that will actually put a flat surface on it. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm using the pedestal grinder to take the edges and the front down, and I'm using the flat sander to grind the faces, which is much easier. There we go, dip it in the water, keep it nice and cool. Don't want to overheat it. And we would follow that same process for both screwdrivers, basically. And once we've done that, we're going to go back into the other workshop again and we're going to start the tempering process. Right, so here we are back in the workshop. I've got my 2 screwdriver blades back in the forge. What we're going to do now is we're going to heat those back up again, cherry red, and we're going to dip them both into Casonite. So on the floor there's a tin of special compound called Casonite. That is basically to put a really hard skin on the surface and make the tool tip wear better. So without hardening them up, you could harden and temper them without the Casonite, but it means the surface of the screwdriver, you could still file it, which means you can still damage it, which means you can still wear it away. So to give the tool tips more longevity, what we're doing is we're dipping them in Casonite, which is going to put microns of hardness into the surface, because Casonite is basically carbon. There's a few other ingredients mixed in with it, but essentially what you're doing is you're adding more carbon to the surface. So you want those as hot as you can get them, really, really red hot. Dip them in the Casonite, back into the forge, heat them back up again so that the Casonite, the carbon melts into the surface of the tool, and then we're going to fast quench them in really fresh cold water. You don't want to leave the old pot of water there. I've gone and got a new pot of water, believe it or not. And for speed, I've even put the pot of water on the floor so that when they're out, as you can see, whack, convenient, straight into the pot to quench it. So that changes the molecular structure, makes it all go hard. The addition of the carbon adds a different crystalline structure. I'm not going to go into the science of it all. If you want to look into the science of it, there's plenty of videos online. You can look into the science of medite and austenite and goodness knows whatever else. But basically all you need to know is it hardens up that surface so that you can't touch it with a file anymore. Yeah. So now what we're going to do, once we've done that, is we're going to clean and polish them up. And it's really important at this stage to give those a really, really polished finish, because the next thing we're going to do after the polishing phase is we're going to temper them. And that will set the final hardness into the tip that is required to make it a useful screwdriver. Because what we don't want is we don't want the tip of the screwdriver being so brittle that as soon as we try and turn it on a really tough screw or undo a really tough screw, we snap the end of the screwdriver off because it's been over hardened. It's too brittle. So it needs to be just hard enough to be able to handle tight screws, but not so hard that it's going to snap off. So when a screwdriver snaps off on a really hard screw, it's been hardened probably as much as a wood chisel has been hardened or a cold chisel has been hardened. In other words, it's far too much. So once we finish polishing, in the next section I'll talk about tempering. Right, so we've polished the 2 screwdriver blades up, and what's important now, you notice that before, when I was heating it up, I was heating up the very tips. Now what we need to do is we need to heat below, well below, as you can see, the tip. Yeah, and the reason the blade needs to be really polished is because what we're looking for is straw colours. Now hopefully the camera will pick up the shades, because I've started quite down on a dark bit, but if you hopefully look closely, you will actually see that metal changing colour. And basically what we're looking for is, as the metal heats up, it will go from steely blue or steel colour, and then it will start to change to a yellow strawy colour and go bronze before it goes blue and then purple. If we were doing wood chisels or cold chisels, we'd let the blue stroke purple get to the tip of the screwdriver. But in this case, all we want is it between straw and bronze. If it goes blue, it might be too hard. So what we're aiming to get is the straw sort of bronze shade on the very tip, and once we get that shade at the tip end of the screwdriver, again we quench it. And there it is, about there. Any second now that's going to go in the quench. And it happens that quickly. So ages, you're looking for the colour, and then all of a sudden you just move that heater fraction and it starts racing up the screwdriver, and there you go. Now if the camera picks that up, you can see that the blue is at the base of the screwdriver head, but the bronze is at the tip end. And that was just perfect. Now we're heating up the second one, and we will follow exactly the same process. Heat it up behind the screwdriver head and watch those colours. When the colours start to change on the shaft, we will follow those colours right up to the tip and put it into the quench. You can see it there much better than the hexagonal one. You can see it's gone blue, but if you look below the flame, you can probably see it more clearly. You've got straw, bronze, blue and purple. And what we do is we push those towards the tip by starting lower in the shaft and then slowly raising the heat up. And there you go. Look at that, perfect. Bright mild steel, and these two are hexagon stock. Now, normally hexagon stock by its sheer nature is used for tools like cold chisels, bolsters, punches and various other implements. So normally it has a carbon content, and it would be indicated by a red paint blob on the end when the stock is new. Bright mild steel has a blue blob of paint on it to indicate that it's bright mild. Now what bright mild means is it's got pretty much no carbon content, so is no good for tools. However, the test for me was to make these screwdrivers and see what would actually happen if we put them through the hardening and tempering process. And for a screwdriver, they seem to be okay. So we've hardened them right up, and then we've tempered them down exactly the same as these two, but what we didn't do is we didn't add any casonite. So at this stage, what I'm going to attempt to do is I've piloted this bit of wood. If I can find the hole. I think that's probably going to be a bit too big for the 8. But what we're going to do is we'll put a 10 in there, and we'll put a 12 in there. Oh God, that hole's not big enough for the 12, damn. Right, so I'll have to drill a new hole for the 12. Never mind, right, we'll do them one at a time then. So, as you can see, I haven't had a chance to make a handle for them yet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wind this in and tighten it up. But what I want to see is when we get to the really final tighten, will the tip on the screwdriver give way, or is it actually stiff enough to do the job? And as you can see, that we piloted the hole, by the way. So we've drilled a hole in there, and then in the stock bit underneath, we've drilled a small pilot hole. So we've got a clearance hole in the main bit and a pilot hole in the stock bit. And that, well, you're going to wreck that head before you ruin that tip. So that's quite impressive. Now, I'm probably not even going to bother wasting my time with that one, because that one is for the 8mm. So these screws, I don't know if the camera can see these set of screws here. So we've got 8 by 1 1/4, 10 by 1 1/4, and 12 by 1 1/2. So the 8 is the head size, and the 1 1/2 or 1 1/4, sorry, is the length. Yeah, I didn't get out 3-inch screws because it's a pointless sort of waste of time. Here's one I prepared earlier, moment, was it? Alright, so we'll put a 6 in there, and we're just going to put a clearance hole in here. There we go. Which is not huge. Now, there we go, that's better. So that's the 12. Now what we're going to do is we are going to attempt to tighten the 12 up. Now, as you can see, the head on that is bigger to cope with the bigger slot in the 12. That's another important thing actually when you're doing screws up. The size of your screwdriver tip must be a good, comfortable fit for the screw that you're using. If it's not, you're either going to tear the head up or ruin the screwdriver. Now, that is starting to get quite tight. The question is, will the head give way or will the tip of the screwdriver give way? No, the mole grips gave way. Oh. Okay, let's put them in one divot more. Oh, I probably should have waited until I'd made handles for them. But anyway, never mind, never mind. We are creatively adaptable. And that is doing a pretty good job of winding that in, and that is, trust me, that is very tight, and it's not going in perfectly straight, which is a shame, because that makes it a bit harder. But we're not worried about the screws. There you go, the head's starting to give way. So that,
the head of the screw, isn't it?
yeah, the head of the screw has given way. Now that wasn't a perfect grind in the first place, but that head's not given way, but the head of the screw has started to give way. So that's quite good. I'm quite impressed with that. Ouch. So what we'll do now is we'll put a new piece of stock in there. And where is, oh, there it is. We'll drill a 6 clearance hole in there just quickly. There we go. Come on. Ugh. There we go. Bloody thing. This is when you need about 1,000 million pairs of hands, or a battery drill that actually works.
I have a battery drill.
Yeah, but I've got a pilot drill fixed in this one. So you put a clearance hole in your top bit,
yeah,
and you put a small pilot in the bottom bit. The pilot being pretty much the core size of the actual screw. Yeah. So the I didn't want to really get into this, but anyway, so the screw just drops in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if there's any tightness or thread binding in this bit, when you put the screw in, it will push the 2 pieces of wood apart.
Yeah.
So you want a nice clearance hole and a countersink in that bit,
And a small hole.
and then you drill a small hole in the bottom bit, And that way, what happens is the two pieces pull together.
And with no pressure on the top of it.
Yeah. So it locks it. I mean,
Yeah.
you'd never get that apart.
No.
You'll break the wood up before they came apart, kind of thing. So there we go. There's a 12 and an 8. Now what we're going to do is we are going to try the hardened ones and see what happens. Will the hardened ones tips give way? That is the question. Oh. Now, that one fits into that beautifully. So we'll wind that in. Bearing in mind, these have only been case hardened once. So the case hardening will be very much on the surface. Yeah. So what's in, yeah, that started to, the screw started to give way, but it's boring that right down. You can hear it squeaking, that'll tell you how tight it is. And it's not damaged the screwdriver tip at all.
But they're pretty strong, yeah.
So what I would deduce from that is that a one dip would probably be great for a screwdriver because it hardens the surface, but without making it brittle, that the tip would snap off.
Yeah.
Because I've seen manufactured screwdrivers where the tip has actually been hardened so much it snaps off on a really tight screw.
Happened to me loads of times, yeah.
And that's why I'm doing this particular demonstration with these screws, because it's important to understand the difference between like hardening and tempering a cutting tool and hardening and tempering a screwdriver. And that's where, as they say, the devil is in the detail. And it might be a bit boring when you start looking at charts, but if you want to become a real specialist, these are all the little nuances that you need to know. Now, it's quite a long time ago since I did my apprenticeship at Ford Motor Company, and we had to study metallurgy and goodness knows whatever else. Right, I can't tighten that up anymore, and it's knackering the head. It's starting to shred the head of the screw. But again, if you can see that, it's not twisted it, it's not bent it.
I can't see it.
Can't.
Yeah, there, yeah, that's good. I can see it now.
So if I tip that on the end, and actually this one is quite thin. It wasn't perfect for that size of screw, ironically, because the end is quite thin. If I compare it to that one, which is a bit thicker, and then if you see that one, which is the non-hardened one, I don't know if you can see that thickness, but it's slightly thicker. And if I just see if I can wind it out. That's a sign of a good screwdriver. Even though that screw head is damaged, it's enabled me to wind it out. But now, hopefully, let me take those off because I don't want those in the way, but you'll see what I mean. So I was able to wind that in, but the reason, now, you tell me when the focus is right. Maybe it'd be easier if I do it against white paper.
Yeah.
But if I put that in there, that's quite thin. It flops about. So that you don't want that, yeah. Right, if I now put that one in, it flops about a little bit, but not as much. So ideally, where's all my other ones? I've got a really thick one here. Ah.
Oh, you want to tighten the screw, is it?
Yeah. So if you look at that one goes in there, and there's almost no flopping about. So that's your perfect fit screwdriver for that slot, and it's also the right width. So when you put it in, you haven't got screwdriver overhang that will start gouging the wood. So, all in all, not bad. Quite impressed with that, I have to say. But I think what it has proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, if you forgive my messy workshop, is that what the case hardening will add to the screwdriver, if you temper it properly, is just that extra bit of resilience to the surface, but without making it so brittle that it would snap. Now, to put that into context, here's one I made earlier moment. Oh my God. Oh yeah, I know. Cliche. A classic cliche. Tin of paint. Yeah, tin of paint. If this was a chisel and you went to lever it off with a chisel, and this was probably a bigger tin and quite hard, and you did that with it, what you'd do is you'd snap, hang on, let me take that glove off, you'd snap a lump out of that tip. You'd probably end up with a semicircle in there, or worse, the whole lot would go. Because it's so brittle, and it's not designed for opening tins, it's designed for shaving, cutting pieces of wood. But the screwdriver, even though it's not the right tool for the job, you'll get away with opening a tin with no damage to the screwdriver because it's not that brittle. I think they would start to deteriorate or twist or get damaged quicker than these ones. I think that case hardness just gives them an edge because it's only on the surface, but it just gives them enough. Casenite, which is the black powder that the screwdriver tip was dipped into, is basically a mixture of carbon and other carbon-inducing atoms. So what we're doing, when we heat the screwdriver up, we heat it up to a medium red, dip it into the casenite, and that makes the casenite stick. And then we heat it up again, and that helps the casenite to be absorbed into the surface of the metal. And by doing that, by adding the carbon to the bright mild, as you can see, where is my, there it is. There's a different tone, like you can scratch that screwdriver because it's not been hardened. Man, it just slides straight off. So by adding that carbon, it hardens up the surface. Now, I could talk to you forever about crystalline structures and austenite and words I can't even remember how to pronounce, beginning with M. But the metal goes through a process when you heat it up. So you change its molecular structure fundamentally. And the hardening and tempering process fundamentally alters that structure till it's perfect for whatever you want to do with it. So if it's a wood chisel or a metal chisel or cold chisel, then you want it a lot harder, but you have to understand it's going to be brittle as a process. You know, whereas a screwdriver needs to be just hard enough to be able to tighten up screws, but not so hard that it's going to snap when you start getting to the bit where you want to really tighten them up. You know, so yeah, it was an interesting process. So they worked fundamentally without the casenite. They did work. They tightened up screws, no problem. So the only advantage of the casenite in this instance is that it would give the screwdriver a bit of additional wear and tear factor.